Welcome back to All of Power TV. I'm your host, Paul Metsa. I've been having an enjoyable chat with my new friend and the man I'm supporting for U.S. Senate in Minnesota in 2018, Professor Richard Painter. Richard, so talk about what you think you can do for Minnesota.
Well, I think it's critically important to get corruption out of politics. We have a serious problem with Donald Trump and Mike Pence, and I want to get rid of them, and I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that this administration is investigated by the United States Senate Judiciary Committee and other committees of the Senate. That's critically important. But we also need to focus on the influence of money in politics. That's what got us into this situation, because voters of both political parties are fed up with the political action committees, the super PACs, the dark money organizations that permeate our political system. And that's why I will not take any money from political action committees. Zero. None. Not welcome in my campaign. Other people running the Democratic primary for Senate in the United States House of Representatives are taking money from PACs. I just won't take it. I want this system fixed. And until it's fixed, I'm not going to participate in the most corrupt parts of this system. PACs, super PACs, dark money organizations. They are ruining our democracy. The dark money organizations, many of them may very well be funded from outside the United States. We have no idea where the money is coming from into organizations such as Citizens United, the group that won the Supreme Court case back in 2009. Vladimir Putin can set up his own versions of Citizens United and run attack ads in Minnesota and elsewhere against candidates. This is unacceptable. We cannot allow it to continue. We also need members of the United States House and Senate to clean out their own personal financial conflicts of interest. They should not be owning healthcare company stocks while they're making decisions about healthcare, or energy stocks while they're making decisions about energy, or defense industry stocks while they're running our defense budget sky high. The members of Congress should have a portfolio of mutual funds and life insurance and other conflict-free assets. Senator Amy Klobuchar does. I've urged Senator Smith to sell her stocks in the healthcare industry that create conflicts of interest. But we need to have a clear rule for every single member of the House and Senate. No more financial conflicts of interest, no more PACs and super PACs, and have nothing to do with the dark money organizations. We need a Supreme Court that's going to reverse Citizens United, or have a constitutional amendment that's going to reverse Citizens United. That is unacceptable to allow corporations, many of which may be foreign corporations, to corrupt our government.
Well, now we're hearing news that the NRA has been getting money from Russia.
Oh, yes. I'm sure Vladimir Putin is very happy to see as many school shootings in the United States as possible.
But yet they don't allow gun ownership in Russia.
Of course not, because he's going to have law and order in Russia, while he wants the United States to disintegrate. He's going to support racial hatred in the United States, in groups like the Ku Klux Klan and the alt-right that started the ruckus down in Charlottesville, just as the Russians supported the Communist Party and others who were trying to start a ruckus in the United States in an earlier era. The agenda in Russia for a century has been to destabilize Western democracies. Most of the time they did that from the left wing of the political spectrum. They got some traction over in Europe doing that, but very little in the United States. We blew the so-called communist threat way out of proportion in the McCarthy era. But the left wing has never had very much power in the United States. But the right wing is extremely dangerous here. And once Vladimir Putin discovered the alt-right, Breitbart News, the Ku Klux Klan, the inherent racism of many in the right wing, it was a field day. And he put himself in a position where he could very well have chosen the President of the United States.
There's a related issue there, before I want to talk to you about single-payer health care, is northern Minnesota especially, well, really all over Minnesota, but northern Minnesota, there's a lot of hunters. So what is your position on guns, ownership, registration, and AR-15s?
Well, I think gun ownership is fine, just like automobile ownership. I have 2 cars in my garage, and the state of Minnesota knows that I have those cars, and I have to be licensed. And if one of my kids wants to drive those cars at age 16, he or she is going to have to get a license. So we have a license and registration process for cars. If a car is transferred, the state of Minnesota knows about that as well. But with guns, it's really inadequately regulated. We do not know about transfers of guns. We do not know about ownership. There's a background check conducted if you buy a gun at a store, but not if you buy the gun at a gun fair or over the internet and it's shipped to you in the mail. That's just absurd. So we can have gun ownership just like we do car ownership, but with a license and registration system. And it's very important to have this because if the police get a domestic violence call, they should be able to check and see, what kind of guns are in the house. And if it appears threatening, call for a backup unit. The officers are entitled to that. If a child, a teenager, is getting in trouble in school and appears to be emotionally distraught, having serious problems or problems with the law enforcement ought to be able to check and see if there's a firearm in the house, particularly if it's a semi-automatic weapon, and go and talk with the parents about securing the weapon and getting help for the child rather than having the child shoot up the school, as we've seen tragically has happened in too many instances. So we can have guns and enjoy guns for sporting, and people can have guns for self-defense, which is important in some rural areas, certainly. But we can do so with the well-organized militia, well-regulated militia that is set forth in the Second Amendment of the Constitution. And the NRA consistently ignores the founders' intent to have a well-regulated militia, to have some rules that apply to gun ownership. And that's just absolutely absurd. And that is, at this point, is threatening the stability of our society when children cannot go to school knowing that they're safe from being murdered by a classmate or by some other deranged person who has access to a gun that that person shouldn't have.
Well, and then you have, the Bill of Rights, the life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, which is tough to enjoy if you're paranoid by all the unregulated guns.
Well, absolutely. And I think that the Declaration of Independence sets forth the objective of the American Revolution and why we wanted to be an independent country. And then we started the process of figuring out what our Constitution would look like. And but the objective set forth in the Declaration of Independence is so important that we want to have a country where everybody can enjoy life and liberty, the pursuit of happiness. And if we aren't safe, we don't feel safe in our streets and in our schools because we have people running around with guns who shouldn't have them. We have the rules for gun ownership. We don't have the type of society that our founders intended us to have. We need to fix things, and we certainly can do so while conforming to the Constitution of the United States. So the National Rifle Association has made up a whole story about the Second Amendment, that there is no regulation at all of guns, even though the Second Amendment itself talks about regulation of guns. It's completely absurd.
Single-payer health care. Tell us about that.
As I talk to small business owners and entrepreneurs and middle-class people throughout the state of Minnesota and around the country, I am hearing consistently the view that we need to have a single-payer health care system where there is one large insurer that is going to insure everybody and negotiate fair prices from the drug companies, from the medical device companies, from the healthcare providers. What we've got right now is lots of different insurance companies that are sending a lot of money to their shareholders and to their executive officers. What do the insurance companies do? They push a lot of paper around. Our money goes into the insurance company, and then they pay out for healthcare providers and for drugs. Lots of money being taken off the top for profits for the shareholders in compensation for the executive officers. What do we get for that? Very little, because insurance companies do not negotiate down the drug prices very effectively or the medical device prices that are driving up the cost of health care. So you can have the same drug selling in the United States for 2 or 3 times what it would cost in Europe or in Canada. Get a medical devices costing much more for American hospitals than they do abroad, because nobody has the negotiating power to sit down with Medtronic or any other company and say, look, this is what we're going to pay. End of discussion. That's what Canada does, that's what Germany does, or Great Britain, but no, not the United States.
I was doing a little research on you, and I saw an interview and explained this because I think you nailed it on the head. Everybody says this is a socialist idea. It's actually really good. Single payer is good for capitalism.
Well, absolutely, yes. And I'm not talking about going all the way Great Britain did and having the doctors and the hospitals work for the government. I'm focusing on the insurance piece here. If the insurer is a governmental entity or a quasi-governmental entity with the negotiating power to get down the prices of drugs to reasonable levels, so we pay the same thing people do in Canada and Germany, the same thing with the medical device companies. We're going to save an enormous amount of money. Second, healthcare should not be tied to your job, your place of employment. The United States is alone among industrialized nations in saying that the employer is responsible for finding you a health plan and then paying for part of it or taking it out of your salary. What that means is that your health care is tied up with your job. So if you want to leave a boring job in a major company and start your own company, be an entrepreneur, you can't do that without losing your health insurance. You have to go out into the private market and purchase insurance at enormous expense, or go without insurance. So you're tied down to your job. We call that job lock. And then if you go out and start a new company, if you're a small business, when you hire people, you have to worry about getting insurance for them. And you've got to pay a lot more than the government pays or the big companies pay. The government, of course, has single payer. So they have the negotiating power that goes along with single payer. The big companies at least get a cut rate on the insurance that they get from the major insurance companies for their employees. The entrepreneur, the small business owner, is very much disadvantaged. So what we have is 1/7 of our economy is healthcare. We're spending a huge amount. Many Americans are without health insurance, or without adequate health care. So we aren't even doing a good job on health care in the United States. And it's dragging down the other 6/7 of our economy and dragging down entrepreneurship. Health care, as we are currently administering our system, is destroying entrepreneurship, destroying capitalism. And so I can't see how anybody could say they are a pro-business candidate for public office and not endorse single-payer health care or something very similar to it. Because if we keep on going the way we're going, the United States is going to consistently fall behind other countries that have a much more rational system for providing health care.
What's your positions on medical cannabis, medical marijuana, legalization of marijuana, hemp?
That's none of the federal government's business. I think Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General, has better things to do than sticking his nose into marijuana laws. The federal government needs to get out of the debate over marijuana. And the states, that is an area where the states have the right and the responsibility to take over and make decisions. If a state is comfortable with the law enforcement with respect to driving under the influence of cannabis, and they feel they can protect the public from dangerous drivers and other risks associated with cannabis, there are a lot of advantages to legalization. But that's a decision that should be made at the state level. Colorado, California, many states have chosen to legalize marijuana, and I believe other states are going to as well. And the federal government needs to stay out and mind its own business.
Well, you know, I think the argument against marijuana for years has been it's a gateway drug. This whole idea of the gateway drug that it's going to lead to harder drugs, I believe it's the exact opposite. I think it's a gateway back. I know ex-heroin addicts that like to smoke marijuana, hit that pleasure center, relax, and enjoy life, watch a movie, make love to their wife, go out and have dinner. And they don't have the, you know, that's replacing their need for heroin. I know hardcore alcoholics that don't drink anymore, but they like a couple puffs off a joint every now and then just to chill out and enjoy the evening. And when you look at whether it's the opioid addiction, how effective medical marijuana is for pain and for just getting back to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Bill Maher says the government shouldn't be in control of my brain, or my happiness. So that's my 2 cents on marijuana.
Well, yes. To the extent marijuana has been a gateway drug, it's because we criminalize marijuana. So when we criminalize marijuana, you got to go to someone to buy marijuana who is engaged in criminal activity of selling the marijuana. Well, that person is likely to also be selling other drugs or know people are selling other drugs. So it's an entry gateway into the illegal distribution of drugs. It could range from marijuana to heroin to LSD. The best way to make sure that marijuana is not a gateway drug is to legalize marijuana and then put it in the category of alcohol and a regulated drug. And alcohol is a drug too, and it's regulated. And to have a means for testing drivers to make sure drivers are not under the influence and have strict laws there. But if we move marijuana over to the category that we have for alcohol and leave it to the states, as the Constitution leaves the alcohol question to the states, then those states that choose to legalize marijuana will not have to deal with the gateway drug problem because the marijuana will be sold in reputable stores that are regulated, while the drug dealers are dealing the rest of the stuff.
Or just be able to plant it in your backyard next to the cucumbers and tomatoes.
Well, yes, and that's what people can do.
It does come from the earth.
We've got to make a decision. What should government be regulating, and what should government not be doing? And we need small government in many respects. Government should not be regulating who you marry, or whether or not a woman has an abortion, or what we do at the end of life. The decisions are made at the end of life. About physician-assisted suicide or anything else. And government certainly shouldn't be regulating drugs such as alcohol. And if we can figure out a way to, as I say, to detect marijuana drugs in the bloodstream for drivers, which I think we can, government shouldn't be in the business of regulating marijuana. Government needs to focus on the destruction of our environment. Government needs to focus on the distribution of wealth and on health care. There are certainly priorities for government, but we don't need government sticking its nose where it doesn't belong. And I also want to emphasize the war on drugs has been extremely expensive. And we have a very high incarceration rate, disproportionately African Americans who are tied up in our justice system over drugs. And that makes drug offenses a gateway to additional crimes and to creating more hardened criminals in our justice system.
And broken families.
And broken families, because people are put into the justice system through drug crimes, which makes absolutely no sense. So even if a drug is illegal, such as heroin, and there are other drugs that we may want to continue to treat as being illegal, we should focus on treatment and getting people off of addiction, and focus on it as a public health problem. The same with the opiate crisis, rather than an excuse for yet more incarceration and creating yet more hardened criminals through a criminal justice system that, once again, all the evidence is showing is very discriminatory with respect to African Americans and other minority populations, which suffer a much higher incarceration rate.
And we can find more about Professor Richard Painter, my guest this evening, at your website, which is what, Professor?
PainterMinnesota.com.
Okay. We're going to take a little break and then come back and we're going to drop politics by the wayside, talk some human interest with my guest, Professor Richard Painter, on Wall of Power TV. This is Paul Metsa. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Wall of Power TV. My guest for the whole show tonight, my new friend, Professor Richard Painter, who's running for Senate in 2018. Here in Minnesota. Richard, I got to ask you a personal question. When I was down in Memphis, my friends asked me, if you had Bell's palsy or a stroke, because it looks like the right side of your face is a little frozen at times.
Oh, yes. Well, what happened is a couple of years ago, I got hit with a bad case of shingles. I should have had the shingles shot, but the insurance companies won't cover the shingles shot till you're 60 years old. And then the doctors, of course, their advice pretty much tracks what the insurance companies are willing to pay for. So they say, well, you don't really need to worry about it till you're 60. Well, that's not the case. I got hit with it at age 53 when I was driving back from Harvard University, where I'd worked on a campaign finance book for a year. And
where you graduated
right
from?
here. Well, oh yeah, back in '84.
Yeah.
But I got hit with the shingles back in 2015. I was driving back to Minnesota. I thought I had poison ivy from about here down to here, and it was shingles. And by the time I got in the ER and got the steroids and everything, it had taken out a nerve. So it gave me a bad case of what's called Ramsay-Hunt syndrome, which led to partial paralysis here. I'm working with a physical therapist on this to try to get some of my smile back. I don't have that Jimmy Carter smile, but I say, well, look, I've got some time to work on it because I don't want to be smiling anyway till I get Donald Trump and Mike Pence out of the White House. But it is a important.
It might happen by itself at that point.
Absolutely. I got a great big grin on my face over that. But yeah, we certainly need a healthcare system where we think a little forward thinking there. That shingles shot is something people should be getting a lot earlier than age 60. And even if it costs you $200 or so out of pocket, obviously if I had to do over again, I would have done it. And so that's the situation there. But no, it's not a stroke or anything else. And the right wingers have gone on the blogosphere saying that something terrible must have happened to my brain. Because I don't support Donald Trump. Well, that's just not the case.
Richard, your wife is a professor of music at the University of Minnesota. What is her first name?
Karen Painter.
Karen Painter. I hope one day I have the honor and pleasure of coming over to your house for dinner, because I imagine between your expertise and knowledge and her love of music and her knowledge, there's got to be some wonderful dinner conversations.
Oh, absolutely. She's a lot more articulate than I am, and she could certainly talk to you about a lot about music and music history, which she specialized in European music history during the period leading up to and including World War II. She's done a lot of work on the role of musicians and music critics and what happened in Germany in the 20s, 30s, and up to the 40s. And I have to say, she's working on her project there, reading a lot of what happened there in the original German, and then she checks the news and sees what Donald Trump has to say. She's quite concerned about what's happening in our country. And she shares a lot of my concerns and has a perspective on it that many of us do not.
And how many kids do you have?
We got 3 kids.
And what ages?
Middle school age, they are age 15, 13, and 11.
Boys and girls?
And the girl's the oldest, Elizabeth, and William, my son, is the middle one. And then our youngest, Annie, is age 11.
And you guys have a dog, right?
We've got 2 dogs.
Tell us about that, because I'm a big dog guy.
Oh, yeah. Goalie is our big dog. He's got a police record, I think, in 3 states. So he got loose in Mendota Heights, and I think he got picked up, and he got loose in State College, Pennsylvania, when I was on my way driving.
Can't keep a good dog down.
Yeah, driving to Harvard for that 1-year gig. And then I think he got loose once or twice in Massachusetts.
Have you been on Fox News yet?
Oh, yes. I was on Fox a couple of times. Yeah, they don't have any news on there anyway. I don't know why they call it Fox News. The last time I explained to them, I know, of course, why President Trump watches Fox News all the time, because it just caters to anything he wants to say.
Right. And it's that feedback loop.
Oh, yeah. It's a feedback loop.
It's his largest megaphone. What about, have you ever met Robert Mueller?
Oh, yes. He was director of the FBI in the Bush administration. Met him in Washington, D.C. The idea that Robert Mueller is some sort of a left-wing conspiracy figure is just laughable. He's a Republican, a straight-arrow Republican, but he doesn't politicize his job.
Right.
He was a United States Marine fighting in Vietnam alongside John Kerry, who we actually went to high school with John Kerry. Yep, they were fighting there in Vietnam while President Trump was running around Manhattan fighting his personal Vietnam and defending his life and limb, we might say. You know, Robert Mueller is someone who has always been a faithful servant of the United States of America. He's not going to politicize what he does. He's going to stay focused on the Russia investigation, which is only a fraction of the problems we have with respect to illegal and unconstitutional activity in the Trump administration. But he's doing his job, and he's doing it well, and he ought to be allowed to continue to do it. And those who demonize Robert Mueller are really only just playing into the hands of Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, he seems like Wyatt Earp. He's just straight up guy, man.
He's the real deal.
Yeah, he's the real deal.
You don't want to mess with Robert Mueller. No way.
I got to ask you a couple more questions, then we're going to let you go, Professor Painter. But so, if you have the good fortune to be elected to serve in what was Al Franken's seat as a senator from Minnesota, and which is a 6-year term, have you ever thought about, I know it's jumping ahead, you ever thought about if it happened that you might think about going the next step, VP or president?
Well, I'd say you got to do one step at a time on everything. And this term, of course, this election is a 2-year term to finish up Al Franken's seat.
Yeah, that's
his
right.
term.
I forgot. Yeah,
Yep.
right.
Then we have another 6-year term will come up in 2020. Of course, I hope that both political parties have somebody running for president who is willing to be committed to democracy. And that would, of course, rule out Donald Trump and Mike Pence. But we need to have good candidates running for president of the United States. I would be in the, if I were fortunate enough to be in the Senate, would be finishing up a 2-year term, and if I felt I was getting something accomplished, I would want to run for the 6-year term that comes thereafter. But what I want to accomplish in that 2 years is, one, doing everything I can to investigate and I believe secure the removal of President Trump and Vice President Pence. We need to have investigations in the Senate Judiciary Committee, just as we did under Senator Sam Ervin when I was a kid. They're investigating Watergate.
Boy, we miss Sam Ervin these days, don't we?
Absolutely. We need Sam Ervin back there and the
Howard
rest of them.
Baker.
Yep, you got it. What did the president know and when did he know it?
Yeah.
And the vice president too. And that's the key, is to having someone in the Senate who's going to ask those tough questions, because Mike Pence was a lot slippier. He is a lot slicker than Donald Trump. He can try and lie his way out of this in a way that's not so transparent. But Donald Trump tells a lie, we all know he's lying.
Right.
But
anytime he moves his lips.
Absolutely. But we need all those questions asked. Just like Senator Al Franken asked those questions of Attorney General Jeff Sessions about how many Russians he'd known, and he caught Attorney General Sessions in a perjury trap. And that's what forced Attorney General Sessions to recuse from the Russia investigation, because Al Franken caught him in the perjury trap. And if Al Franken hadn't asked those questions, we might have Attorney General Sessions now running the investigation and shutting down Bob Mueller. So it's critically important to have United States senators who will ask the tough questions on the Senate Judiciary Committee. Priority number one, another priority, single-payer health care. We got to get that through, and I believe we can get a lot of moderates and even Republicans to back single-payer health care. Critically important to get that through. And third, we got to do something about the climate change and get the United States back in the Paris Accords. We have a potential catastrophe with respect to climate change, and the United States is doing absolutely nothing. So we got to get back in and cooperating with other countries to address that. So there are 3 top priorities for the next 2 years in the United States Senate. I want to see how much I can do, and then think about taking another shot at another 6-year term if I believe I'm making some progress.
And your website one more time.
PainterMinnesota.com.
Richard Painter, it's been a really pleasure to get to know you. I've enjoyed all your appearances, and it's fun to let your hair down, because you're kind of in the witness box on those TV shows. Yeah. So it's been just fabulous to get to know you as a human being as well. I'm Paul Metsa, your host. We're on every week on MCN6. Stream it, or you can stream us at mcn6.org, Comcast Channel 6. Stick around until next week. We'll save you a seat. Thanks for watching.